A lot can change in 3 years, especially the state of New Zealand's housing crisis. The knock-on effect of the boom 3 years ago now presents a different set of challenges for the government to solve. To tell us more, we're joined by One Roof property commentator Ashley Church. Kia ora, Ashley, thanks for being with us.
G'day, Jack.
You have kind of changed the way you describe or define New Zealand's housing crisis over the last couple of years. Can you just explain that for us?
Yeah, well, if you went back to 2016, Jack, which was the top of the market, the concern at the time, the thing that was animating everybody and was filling up newspaper headlines was the concern that house prices were escalating so quickly that it was closing people out of the market. 3 years on, in April 2019, and the concern now, if you're to read the media, is that the concern that house prices are actually going to drop. So there's been quite a dramatic change in that space. And so what that tells us, there's nothing unexpected about that. What that tells us is that the things that should animate us about the market are different depending on where we are in the cycle.
Yeah, this means, though, that governments have to constantly adapt policy for whatever set of challenges they're facing.
It does, and the problem with that, of course, is that the three parties to what happens in the market aren't necessarily geared up to do that. Political parties come in with ideological agendas that are for 3-year terms. The Reserve Bank's fixated on inflation, that's its entire remit, and the banks themselves aren't necessarily focused on what's best for the customer in the market. They're focused on how they can be profitable. So the problem that we've got, of course, is that the way that the situation's set up at the moment, it's not necessarily adaptable to changing policy on the hoof if you need to.
It's interesting to observe some of the commentary. Like you say, just a couple of years ago, there were so many people saying it's really concerning how quickly house prices are increasing.
Absolutely.
And now there are a lot of people saying it's really concerning that we might face a decline in housing prices. It's like you sort of can't win no matter what situation you find yourself in. Are you personally nervous about the prospect of declining capital values?
No, I'm not. For all the reasons that we've talked about in the past, I think that the market will stay flat with maybe some small decreases over the next few years. But there's an issue around confidence which is important. And so for me, if you were looking at the market right now and you were saying, what do we need to do right now as opposed to 3 years ago, there's probably 4 things that you would want to do. The first is that you would need to start with the premise that you needed to protect capital value. So talk of deliberately crashing the market and some of this other stuff that's come out over the last few years, take that off the table because that's not good for the market, not just in respect to protecting house owners, but in terms of the impact of confidence on the wider economy. The second one is dramatically increasing the housing supply, because particularly given that Kiwi Build appears to have failed, so we need to look at other mechanisms for doing that. The third one is because 4 in every 10 people that are in a house are going to be renting that house or living in rental accommodation rather than owning it. We need to increase our rental stock. That's an ongoing issue. And the last one is, although, as I said to you 2 or 3 weeks ago, our house ownership, home ownership levels have actually been consistent over the last 100 or so years. They were about 10% higher back in the 90s, and it should be an aspiration for the country to get back to that level. So those are the 4 things I think that should underpin policy.
Okay, but I want to go to those first 2 points though, Ashley. How do you protect capital value while dramatically increasing supply?
Well, there are some things you can do. In fact, I've got 3 ideas I want to throw at you, Jack. 3 ways that if you implemented these things right now, you could actually address most of those 4 issues that I just talked about. The first one is you need to put aside the ideology and simply look at the market. Abandon this stuff around punishing investors, this envy stuff. Get rid of these ideas around capital gains tax. Move away from things like ring fencing of tax losses. All of the stuff that's designed to actually hit the market at the moment, shelve that, because that removes confidence from the part of the market that's going to increase rental supply. The second thing that I would be doing right now is putting in place a policy that said, so at the moment, if you're an investor, you need a 30% deposit to buy a property, 10% if you're building a new property. I'd be saying if you're building a new property to an investor, no LVR. You can do it with no deposit, provided you can service that loan and the bank's going to lend it to you and you're credit worthy of it. We'll get rid of that in its entirety. What that would do is it would change the nature of the market, because investors would start to focus on building new property for rental, thus dealing with 2 of those issues. And the third one, and this is the one that's a bit out there, but I think it would have an enormous impact on the market, is for first home buyers, take those LVRs off anything. So in other words, if they wanted to buy an existing property or build a new property, no LVRs. That would have 2 or 3 effects. One, it would hugely impact on confidence in the market in a positive way. 2, it would increase stock of property. And 3, this whole bank of mum and dad thing, where you've got a lot of young people who can't afford a home because unless they've got a mum and dad with a property that they can use for equity for the deposit, they can't buy. Does away with that completely. Just those 3 things, and you could tweak those, and you'd probably want to make them time limited to say 2 years, because the market will pick up again at some point in the future. But even the combination of those 2 or 3 things would make an enormous impact in respect of those 4 things that I talked about.
Always good to speak with you. Thanks so much,
Thanks,
Ashley.
Jack.
One Roof property commentator Ashley Church.